Yes.
Hi there. My name is Blake. I wanted to talk to you about how to connect Stellarium to a telescope mount and drive it. I started to prepare a video, and the monolithic video was 90 minutes or 2 hours long. It was crazy long. So I decided to break it up with optional components. There might be parts that you're interested in and some that you are not. So you can watch what you want. So this is a 6-part video series now. If you're trying to do things where you want to operate a mount and control a camera and a filter wheel and so on, you're probably going to need to watch all 6 pieces of this. But if you have a simple setup, you have a common type of telescope, you have simple wire cabling, in theory, you can connect directly to Stellarium, and it might be pretty simple, just a few links in the chain. But I'm going to go through everything. I want to go through every single step in detail to the best of my knowledge and talk about sort of what's involved, what you need to do, all the pieces that you need to assemble. So this whole series will be very detailed, combined, and hopefully it'll give you all the information, all the pieces that you need to solve your particular problem. I will be showing my rig and my setup, which is a very esoteric, very specific thing, but I will speak generally through this whole series. So this is part 1 of the 6 videos, and I'm just going to talk about some research you might do and questions that you might ask to figure out what's required and to assemble all the pieces in theory that you need. So again, this is part 1. Part 2 is going to be about device independent solutions. You may be familiar with this. ASCOM or INDI may be required to get things to work for you. I'll talk about that in a separate video. I'll talk about it a little bit in this one just to frame it. We need to talk about the data connection, and I'm trying to word that generically. Some people want to go Wi-Fi. I'm going to use a wired connection. We have to do some preliminary steps in Stellarium to get it ready. And then in theory, we've got all the pieces in place. We should be able to start up our mount, connect Stellarium, issue slew commands, halt them if we need to. I'll show you how you can do a graceful shutdown, and I'll talk about in the final video tips and tricks and cautions and troubleshooting ideas, and I'll provide links for everything that I've talked about. So again, you can watch which ones you're interested in or replay just one portion that you're interested in. My experience, hopefully I can bring a lot to the table here, but I've been an amateur astronomer for many years, got serious about it in the 80s, bought a telescope in 1990, kind of floundered a little bit. I decided to join the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, and that was a game changer. It really helped me out. I've been a member since 2007, and I've been fortunate through the organization to be able to get even more exposure to different types of telescopes and mounts and stuff like that. In fact, I'm a supervisor at the Carr Astronomical Observatory. We have a big rig up there that's on a Paramount ME, and of course that uses the Sky software, and that's proprietary software for that mount, but that's high-end, uh, sort of industrial grade or research grade robotic telescope software and hardware. So it's been a real joy using that and taking advantage of advanced features like the spiral search. Uh, I've also been fortunate to become a trained operator at the David Dunlap Observatory, where there's the 74-inch telescope, the Newtonian Cassegrain telescope, that weighs 25 tons, and it's all completely manually controlled. It's got setting circles, you got to use hour angles, you got to look up the sidereal time. That was a bit of a shock for me because I was used to using computers and software and so on to help me with my observing sessions. So it's been fun learning that. It's the polar opposite of what we're talking about here. And we do use a motor to drive it. And we do have Stellarium on the observatory floor, but it's only just to, look up a number or just to decide on a target. It is not connected to, and I don't think ever will be connected to that old mount. Uh, anyway, that's helped me sort of get a lot of experience in a brute force method for operating a mount. Uh, but in helping members and doing some coaching and using some of the telescopes in the loan program, I've been able to get a lot of experience with different systems and setups. And I've been using Stellarium for a long time. I don't remember exactly when I started using it. I have blog entries that go back to 2009. I've used it mostly on the Windows platform, but I have some Mac experience and Linux experience with Stellarium. I have robotic telescope experience. I use telescopes in the eastern provinces in Canada, and I submit jobs and queries, and then I receive the data back. So I'm not really doing anything there with the mount directly, but I have the end user experience of using a fully robotic, completely autonomous system. And it's got, weather sensors and a dome rotator and all that kind of stuff. And over the years, I've accumulated some ASCOM experience. I've got about 4 or 5 rigs that I use, and I've used ASCOM drivers to get those to work. And that's primarily because I'm based on the Windows platform for all my astronomy stuff. So, but I hope, again, I can still speak generally to Mac users and Linux users as well. And I'm in the IT industry, and I like to tinker and fix things, and I'm a do-it-yourselfer. So again, hopefully I can bring a lot to the table to help you all out. I'm making some assumptions about you that you have a sense that there's a solution, or somebody else that has a telescope like you do, and it's working with some computer software. To make this easy on ourselves, if you have a fairly new telescope and it's kind of standard stuff, it might work, and it actually might be simpler than you think. I'm assuming you have a fairly current version of Stellarium. It doesn't have to be the latest, but in the last year or two, that's good. I'm going to talk about some research that we'll do that might determine if we need to use ASCOM or Indy for a solution. You may not. So some people think, oh, you have to, but you may not need to do that. And I'll explain that more clearly in a moment. But if you are trying to drive your mount and it's an imaging rig, and you want to also remotely control the camera and the focuser and the guide scope, probably you're going down the ASCOM or Indy path already. So your hand may be forced in that respect here. But again, I want to emphasize that it can be optional for some people. We'll talk about the cabling in this session, and I don't have a lot of experience with Wi-Fi, but I'll show physical cabling and talk about some of the issues here. But I'm assuming you've got those bits, or you've ordered a USB serial adapter if you need it, or if you've got the Wi-Fi parts, that you've got them talking to one another. I'm looking for a working, functional, tested, proven connection of some kind. So I'm assuming you have that, and I'll just assume that that part's all working. I will talk about some specific things with respect to serial and USB connections and so on. You can see that there's a lot of moving parts to this, so you got to have some comfort with hardware and software. I'm biased. I'm an IT professional, so I'm kind of comfortable with all of this. But you may have to do some troubleshooting and sort out software and hardware issues. And my last point, I want to emphasize that again, that I hope that you have an idea or a sense that it should work for you. And again, it might be that you know that somebody else has a telescope like yours and it's working okay. That's my perspective. I was using different software and driving this mount and this hand controller. And I needed ASCOM to do that. But I had a working solution. I just never done it with Stellarium. But that shouldn't matter. I would just change the software that was issuing the telescope slew commands. I would just change that and use Stellarium. It should work. So I started to go down that path with high confidence that it would work right. I hit a roadblock, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But in the end, I got it all working. So again, that's where I think you're at while you're watching this. You're trying to get some answers. You think it's possible. There's just some glitches or some things you haven't been able to sort out. Or you're new to all of this and you need to figure out if it's possible. So let's check that now. How do we learn which path we need to take, and how many links in the chain are there going to be that we have to sort of manage? You could do this, but you don't have to. But if you have Stellarium installed on your computer, you could go into the configuration window and go into the plugins and go down to the bottom of the alphabetic list and choose the telescope control. Now, if the load at startup is not checked, you need to activate the plugin. So if you need to, click the load at startup, close the configuration box and restart Stellarium. Then you could retrace your footsteps, come back into this screen. Now the configure button is available. You could go into the configure and then you could add a new telescope. You don't have to do this. I'm simulating or showing you all of this, but here's what you would see. You'd see a screen like this. I took a snapshot from my Stellarium. You can see the version number there, and I did that just a week or so ago. So this is as of January 2021. If you look closely at yours, you might not see ASCOM, but I'll explain that in a moment. But if you have a common type of telescope, it's worth investigating if there's direct support in Stellarium. So if you leave the first radio button selected, Stellarium directly through a serial port, and then you go down to the device settings and you look in the device model and click on that pull down menu and look at the choices in there, you will see a bunch of things. And I've kind of summarized it here on the left. You will see first Celestron Nexstar. So if you have a Celestron scope with a Nexstar hand controller, you're pretty well good to go. You're kind of guaranteed that you'll be able to get Stellarium to work here. If you have a new Celestron with a USB plug in the hand controller and you got a USB data cable, plug it into the computer and you're nearly done. Very, very simple setup there. If you have a Losmandy, there's support for that. I don't like how they've written it though in the menu. They say Losmandy G11, and that's the hardware. That's the specific mount. With a Losmandy G11, you need a control system, and that's the Gemini 1 or the Gemini 2. You can also use a Losmandy GM8. I've done that. And you need the Gemini 1 or the Gemini 2 control system, and it's got the hand paddle, it's got the cables to the motors, and it has data port connections to a computer. So they should really word this in the device model menu as Losmandy Gemini 1 or Gemini 2, something like that. It's not about the G11 or the GM8 here. I'm being picky about the terminology. There's lots of me choices like AutoStar and LX200. And LX200 is noteworthy because a lot of telescope mounts talk in the LX200 language. And you may notice that a number of the choices, like the Nexstar and the LX200, have compatible, parenthetically noted. That means if you have a mount made by some weird telescope company, Telescope XYZ, are us, but they have a mount that operates in Nexstar mode or LX200 mode, you're good to go. You can use the appropriate built-in driver inside Stellarium. If you have a Skywatcher telescope or an Orion telescope with a SynScan hand controller and it's fairly current, or you have the AZ go-to hand controller, then you're ready to go with the appropriate cabling. So that's pretty good. Again, there's lots of common types of telescopes here. It's also interesting to note the Argo Navis. I've used Dobbs, I've used push-to scopes, I've used digital setting circles. In fact, I've used the Argo Navis system. I know how that works, but I've never hooked it up to Stellarium. So I don't have any first-hand experience there. But again, it's good to see it here. That tells us that there is a working solution. And in fact, it's using the LX200 language to get that to work. So that's cool. So if you look in that device list and you see something like your telescope is there and you've got the data cable, you're pretty well done. You might need a USB adapter, but we'll talk about that later. But you're well on your way. But what if you don't have that? What if you have an iOptron? What if you have an astrophysics mount? What if you have a Vixen mount? They weren't listed there. So you might think, oh, I'm dead in the water. I can't use this software to do that. Well, probably you can, but it means you're going to have to use one of these other options that is appropriate. I'm not going to get into these in detail, but external is computer to computer. I've used that in combination with StellariumScope. A quick note about StellariumScope. That's old software, and technically it's probably not needed for a Stellarium mount driver solution. It is still available. You can use it here, but it's considered sort of old software, and new versions of Stellarium don't need it. That they replace it. They have built-in support. So keep that in mind. RTS2, I've never used that. Indy and Indigo and ASCOM are all these platform independent solutions. So that was my experience. I have this special mount and this special hand controller, and it wasn't listed in the device model list. But after I did a bit of research, I found out that people were using this hand controller go-to motor system with computers, and I figured out which driver they were using, and it was an ASCOM driver. So that meant I needed the ASCOM driver itself for the mount, and I needed the ASCOM platform. Now, if you have done that research, or if you're using ASCOM already for other stuff like your camera and filter wheel control, and you've installed the ASCOM software on your computer, you've got the platform there, and then you start up Stellarium, then the ASCOM is listed. So that's why it's showing in my snapshot. I had already previously installed the ASCOM software to get that to work. But the Indy is there and the ASCOM is there to provide device support in the event that there's not direct internal support from Stellarium. I hope that makes sense. So again, when you look in the device model list, if your scope's not listed there, then you're going to want to go look at the Indy websites and ASCOM websites and see if there's support there. And if you find it there, then you know your pathway. So it's either direct internal support or it's using ASCOM Indy. That's the common situations that you'll be in. You can also do simulations in Stellarium by using the nothing option, and you can sort of do a mock slew and connection and stuff like that. That might be good for demos or for training purposes. So I hope that makes sense here. Again, the Stellarium people, the developers, did us a favor by building in direct internal support for a variety of devices. And they kind of handled the common telescopes. But our uncommon telescopes are probably supported by ASCOM or Indy. So that defines which way you're going to go. Do I have to go the ASCOM route? Do I have to go the Indy route? Or can I do direct support? Now I'm going to talk about in the part 2 video, I'll talk about the ASCOM Indy platform in more detail there. But let's carry on here. Here's my solution. Here's my pathway. And while it's very specific to my mount, my hardware, my hand controller, and nobody has this. You might think, well, I don't have this, so none of this is applicable. All of this is applicable, or much of this is applicable. So I'm going to speak generally here. If you have a Nexstar hand controller with a Celestron, and it's one of the new ones with a USB data cable and USB port, you plug that into your computer and you configure Stellarium with the appropriate built-in driver, and you're up and running. That's like just a few links in the chain. I have an old serial cable, so I needed a USB serial adapter. And when I plug that into my computer, in my Windows computer, it's assigned a communication port, and I have to look it up. You may have to do that. So this middle part is if you need a USB serial adapter, and you may not, depending on your cabling and so on. People with the Nexstar 5 Plus hand controller, I thought it was going to be really simple because there was a USB port and a USB cable, but it turns out that the Nexstar hand controller, the Nexstar 5 Plus hand controller, has a built-in USB serial adapter. So you don't have to buy one now, but it means that you do still have to sometimes look up the port number. If you have a common type of mount, you probably don't need an ASCOM driver or an Indy driver. But I have a weird mount, so I needed a solution by the ASCOM people. So I needed the ASCOM platform and the ASCOM mount driver, and that provided a through connection for me. But I want to emphasize again that the ASCOM part that I'm showing here, and you could easily substitute Indy, the Indy server and the Indy mount driver, that could be optional. You may not need to do that if you have direct support inside Stellarium. But if you're an imager and you want camera control, focus control, guider control, stuff like that, or you have a robotic observatory, then now probably you need all this stuff. And that's adding more links in the chain. So obviously that complicates things. It means that there's more opportunity for something to break. I have a Vixen Super Polaris. It came without motors. I added the IDEA Go-To-Star system to it. It's this amazing mount control system. It has a fantastic hand controller, but it's rare. It's old. It was by this Japanese company. It's gone now. I think the Ioptron people bought it because I can see telltales in their new hand controllers. Anyway, I've got this weird hand controller system on this old mount. It came with a data cable, a serial cable. It has a registered jack on one end. It has a DB9 female serial COM port connector on the other end. Old classic PC computer connector. Of course, modern computers don't have that, or Macs don't have that. So I needed a USB serial adapter for that to work. My old USB serial adapter, when I plug it into my Windows 10 laptop, not recognized. And I tried to update the drivers. It's too old. So I had to borrow one. It's based on a Prolific chipset. It has an HXD chipset in it. It works fine with Windows 10. In fact, I plugged it in, immediately recognized, no driver needed. You might need a driver for your operating system. So if you're getting a USB serial adapter, you may need to install drivers to get it to function. And if you're buying a USB serial adapter, make sure you get a money-back guarantee in case it doesn't work, in case it's incompatible. On Windows, when you connect the USB serial adapter, a COM port assignment is made. The first time you do this, you may have to look it up, and it might change from time to time. It might change session to session here, so be ready for that. As I mentioned, I have the IDEA Go-To-Star system, and there's obviously there's no direct support in Stellarium. But I found out through research that oddly, the Vixen SkySensor 2000 PC driver talks to the IDEA Go-To-Star system. Yay! I had a solution, but I had to download the ASCOM mount driver and install that after installing the ASCOM platform. And I don't do camera control, at least not with ASCOM. I just use backyard EOS to do that. But I need ASCOM to give me the mount capability. So that added a couple of links in the chain, but everything works. Well, at first it didn't. I had Stellarium 64-bit installed on my computer, and it was not talking to the Vixen SkySensor mount driver because it was compiled in 32-bit. So I deinstalled my Stellarium. That was a roadblock for a while, but I deinstalled Stellarium when I figured that out, downloaded the 32-bit version. Everything's working great. So that's my complete end-to-end solution here. It shows you that it's possible. And I have a more complex setup. You might need to do that. But if you're lucky, you can take out some of these puzzle pieces. You may not need to use all these links to get yours to work. It could be really simple, just a few hops. So I wanted to quickly go through this with you, just do some preamble, talk about this whole video series, frame it all, and explain that the next bit is optional for some people. You may not need to do it. But I wanted to talk about how you could do a little bit of research, figure out which pathway you need to go, answer questions like, what do I need? And this is all tied into what your goals are, what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to do imaging with a robotic setup, then you're going to need lots of pieces for this to work. But if you're just trying to use Stellarium to pick targets, to slew to them, it might be real simple, a very simple setup. So thanks for watching this. You have a decision to make now. Do you need ASCOM or Indy? Do you want to learn more about it? Check out my part 2 of this video series. But if you are certain that you don't need it, that you don't need device independent software, if you're not doing imaging, then you can skip part 2. You can go straight to part 3, which is about the data connection. So onward and upwards. I'll see you in one of those next videos.